I'm trying to create some kind of a podcast video or explanation video for Palo Alto tech document for setting up active passive HA firewalls in a public cloud Azure. So uh, I'm a Palo Alto network security engineer certified twice, PCNSE, and working for one of the Palo Alto partner companies. I deploy this active passive firewalls in Azure uh, multiple times, and every time a lot of engineers had a few questions around the whole setup, right? And what happens is a lot of advanced engineer understand most of the part of this whole active passive setup, licensing and how that works, how to deploy the new firewalls, how interfaces work, how networking work. But there are there are a lot of small gotchas in the production environment when you try to deploy it. So I'm just trying to cover those in a quick 10 to 15 minutes talk. So just keep in mind, this is for advanced Palo Alto slash Azure engineers who already know how the Palo Alto HA works, how the Azure works, and I'm gonna basically explain this whole documents and related gotchas when you deploy in the production environment, right? So as soon as you go in Google and quickly search for like how to set up active passive HA Palo Alto in Azure, you will come up with these link very first in the Google, and you can open this up, right? So this is the current version 9.0. You can basically change 10.0 or 9.1, and most of the guidance is going to be completely same thing if you even open a different version. So only there is going to be very small changes in the whole document. So I'm going to follow, as of now, a lot of users is deploying 9.1. So I'm going to follow this 9.1 document, how that's going to look like when you deploy, right? And how you would follow the document, as well as how you can come up with the base what do you call it, base architecture for the whole HA, as well as your production environment. And then you can set up your completely high available setup with on-site site-to-site tunnels, as well as the Azure HA deployment, right? So let's talk about really small things about these firewalls in HA, right? You can use three kind of basically licenses. Those are BYOL, Bundle 1 and Bundle 2 in Azure, if you guys are aware of those. So those are kind of small things. You can take a look into Google and see the documentation, how the licenses work, how you would activate the licenses for specific kind of firewalls. Just keep in mind that whatever you decide the licensing, you might sometime not be able to change the from hourly based license or pay as you go license to BYOL, which is bring your own license. Sometimes you cannot change those licenses. So that's the first gotcha when you purchase licensing. Make sure you deploy the firewalls in whatever you require at the end stage in your production. If you require BYOL, please deploy BYOL firewalls from the start, so you can directly install the licenses and good to go, right? Otherwise, what you might have to do is just take backup of those config, redeploy the firewalls, virtual firewalls, reconfigure everything, and import those configurations. So just save you their extra mile, right? So let's talk about a basic setup in HA, right, in the Azure. So if you see this diagram, I'm going to talk about all these details later on in the video, but if you see this basic diagram, what it has is one firewall with 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a 4 interfaces for both the firewall. One is HA link on the both of them, which is really important. Keep in mind, this is the data link, not HA1 link usually on the on-site firewall. So this does is only session synchronization, right? So keep in mind, this is the link which is responsible for session synchronization between two firewalls, it does not have to do anything with the configuration sync or heartbeat, right? So second is management interface. When you deploy that, that's gonna come with the public IP in the all the environment, so you can keep the public IP on this one and this one for initial configuration, and you can later on remove that. I'm gonna explain how you can remove that later on video, right? So let's say the second interface important one is the management, as I said, and management interface is responsible for configuration syncs, heartbeat, and everything. So for production environment on-site firewall, this is acting as HA1 and this is HA2 link, right? And most of the Azure environment and Palo Alto recommend to follow this two interface kind of architecture. One is trust, one is untrust. Untrust is usually goes to the internet side, but in the Azure you might have load balancer around here and then the internet. And same thing on the trust side, you might have load balancer, right, which is connecting to the lots of different interfaces of or lots of internal subnets you might have on the trust side. So that's going to be basically on the trust side connected with the load balancer or any kind of different router or switch you want to use virtually in the environment. So that's a very basic architecture. There are possibility of adding interfaces. You can quickly Google that, how to add multiple interfaces in the Palo Alto VM. There's a possible way that you could do it is shut down the VM, add new NIC cards, attach them to the interfaces or subnets, and then you can run the Azure CLI command to attach that NICs to those VMs, right? So these VMs, VM100, VM300, they are comes with basically 6 to 7 interfaces that you can search for this Azure Palo Alto VM sizing for the interface, right? So I'm gonna quickly open this very first link which says sizing for the VM series on a Microsoft Azure, which has a really great details about how many interfaces it supports on a VM type. So make sure if you want to get more interfaces, you select those VM type on your deployment, and you can leverage those many interfaces in those deployment with those sizes. Keep in mind, if you even select more CPUs or more RAM on that virtual machine, it's not gonna leverage or it's not gonna work any faster than it's supposed to be. If you read here, like, you can launch the VM series firewall model corresponding to the plan on Azure VM size that's provided more resources than the minimum requirements. However, the firewall will not be able to take advantage of additional memory or CPU cores. So it's advisable to use, you know, whatever it needs, not extra, not less. So if you put extra, it's just not going to use it, right? So just use this guide. I'm gonna put this link in the chat, but if you still want to copy this title here and then you can search that, you will get those details over here. Of course, you can change the versions here, PanOS versions, but it's going to be same details. There is something more over here to use the acceleration over those VMs using a new DS version 2 kind of a virtual machine. We'll take that later on. It's not related as of now, right? So let's say you selected what kind of virtual machine you want to create. You deploying virtual machines from the, you decided this architecture, you selected what IP addresses you would need or whatnot, and then you started the deploying VMs, right? Okay, so as soon as you start deploying the VM, how you gonna deploy the VMs are starting it here. So let's start from over here, right? So set up the firewall for enabling HA. So which is this part, which is we will take a look at later, because this is after you would deploy the whole two firewalls, and then you would do this, right? So okay, so first of all, really important before you start the deployment is knowing what you would need in the future, so you don't mix that up, right? So just to be look at the prerequisite, which are this one here, which says for an HA configuration, both HA peers must belong to the same Azure resource group, which is really important. If you put them in different resource group, it's not going to work, right? Again, if you create a resource group and whatever the name you want in production, and your manager comes back to you and he said, okay, this is not aligning with your whole naming convention in the whole architecture or whole Azure deployment, right? Then you just keep in mind that it is not easy to change the name of the resource group. It is really complicated when it comes to renaming resource group. Might be you guys are more expert, some guys are more expert out there in Azure, they might be know the easy way, but I'm not expert in Azure any kind. But if I would advise to do that, decide the naming convention up front when you deploy these firewalls, so you don't have to go those extra miles, right? So and this is, and that's about the video, right? I'm just going to explain all the gotchas in between, right? So that's the first thing. Make sure you are not going to rename these Azure resource group, and both firewalls are going to be in the same resource group. Okay, so next thing, again one more gotcha is there. If you deploy the first instance of the firewall from Azure Marketplace, then must use your custom ARM template or Palo Alto Networks sample GitHub template, right, for deploying the second instance of the firewall into existing resource group. So this is frustrating that the reason the reason you need a custom template or Palo Alto Network sample template is because Azure does not support the ability to deploy the firewall into an same resource group, right? So if you deploy one firewall, you go ahead and try to deploy a second firewall from Azure Marketplace, quickly searching in the deploying the firewall, and then there you go, boom, you cannot deploy a second firewall without without having an empty resource group. So let's say first one, you know how to deploy it, quickly search in Azure Marketplace for Palo Alto Networks, you select the firewalls, any of the firewalls licenses type, deploy it, and now you're stuck. You don't know how to deploy the second one. So let's say you follow this whole thing, you deploy the first firewall, you're going to give it a name, you're going to give it a management interface, untrust interface, trust, HA, you got everything, right? So if that gives you just the 3 interfaces, I'm going to show you how you add HA, right? So later on this video. So if you got just 3 interfaces, just don't worry about it. Add a trust interface, untrust interface, and a management interface with selecting all the names correct, so you don't have to go back and revisit renaming all this stuff from the start, right? So okay, so let's say you did all these things, trust interface, untrust interface, right, and the management interface. Now you can access the firewall, right? You're gonna select whatever the PAN-OS version it requires. You got all those kind of things, and you create a new resource group while implementing first firewall from the Azure Marketplace, right? So you get that all done. So just let's keep it that way, whatever you have right now, and let's start working on the second firewall before you work further, right? So for the second firewall, it is really simple to deploy, right? The second firewall in the Azure group. You just have to click on this link right here. Let's click on this link, and this is gonna open the new tab with the GitHub, which Palo Alto Networks HA deployment, right? So you're gonna click on this blue button here with saying deploy to Azure, right? As soon as you click on this link right here, it's gonna quickly open your account, which might be open already, Azure account, and it gonna give you same exact interface to input all the information here, right? So input all the information in the same, right, in the same format. Try to use the same kind of trust subnet, untrust subnet, and management subnet, because you're configuring HA, right? So you would require both to be in the same subnet. So use all those exact same information, put it in here, use the virtual machine size as D3V2, right? And uh, and most important part is resource group. Try to select whatever the resource group you already have, which you deploy the Azure Marketplace firewall in it, right? So now you click on next and deploy the firewall. There are small issues in the naming convention. In a lot of them, you would need to select only lowercase name and those kind of things. So just keep in mind that you might have to select this DNS name in all completely lowercase. VM name of the VM series is gonna lowercase. One more gotcha in this, the whole naming stuff is VM name of the VM series, right? So this is gonna be your host name of the firewall, and that's what you're gonna apply inside the firewall. Most likely it's gonna come with the default configuration, this as a host name, and make sure that you cannot change the host name later on, because the host name is use the backend APIs to fail over the firewalls and whatnot. So make sure this is going to be your host name of the firewall, which you would not be able to change after the deployment. So this is going to be your host name. So yep, VM name of VM series, right? So you got another firewall deployed in the same resource group which you had earlier, right? So now what you end up here having is two firewalls in the same resource group having three interfaces: management, untrust, and trust, right? So if you are lucky enough to follow these steps and got these interfaces, right, now you will easily quickly search in your marketplace, search for network cards and add two network cards in the same resource group you have put both the firewalls in it. Create two NIC cards, shut down the firewalls, and attach these new NIC cards you created to these firewalls. And again, let's search how you would do that. Is basically you're gonna go into Google and search at how to add new interface in Palo Alto Azure, right? So there are, you're gonna come up with a couple of links, and then let's say this is the first one link, and quickly look at that, how you're gonna add the interface in the Azure. So usually I use this one every time, and that works really fine. Please keep in mind that you will have to shut down the VM before you can run this command in Azure CLI. So what it does is these are keywords: AZ, VM, NIC, add -G. All these are keywords. You gotta type it the exact same way, and this is gonna be your resource group which you created for those Palo Alto firewalls, right? And then this is exact. You gotta type exact the same it is as -VM -name, which is a keyword, and you're gonna type the first firewall's virtual machine name, and then again -NICS is keyword, and then you're gonna type only one name of the NIC from two you created. So you're going to attach one NIC to the one virtual machine. The same way you're going to run the command for the second virtual machine. You're going to use the same resource group, but you're going to change this VM name, which is called my VM. It's going to be the second firewall, and you're going to select the second NIC interface name. So this way you will add two interfaces, one to each virtual machine. Then you can boot up those firewalls. And if you want to make sure how you're going to see those interfaces already attached to the virtual machine or not, you can enable DHCP IP address for the interface layer 3 and see if it can get the IP address which you assigned the subnet into, right? So that's a very quick test you can do, and then you can if you want to assign the static IP addresses, of course this is HA interface, so you don't need IP address on the interface. You'll just go select the interface type as HA, right? Okay, so most of the job is done. I mean, at this point you have two firewalls with all these four interfaces we discuss here, all these four: management, untrust, trust, and HA. As soon as you got these two, HA is up and running on both the firewalls in a high availability configuration of the Palo Alto firewall. HA1 you're going to select as management interface, and HA2 for data synchronization, or we call a session synchronization, as a HA2 firewall, and everything is green in the dashboard, right? So you got a HA configure everything on the firewall side. So what are the now important part is how you configure those interfaces, which is really important, right? So let's say in these example we configure, right? So what we do is there are two firewalls, so it does not work basically as per your production environment having exact same config, but you will have to configure as a primary IP on the both the firewalls, and then one floating IP between those two. That those all three needs to be in the same subnet. Again, all three in the untrust one needs to be in the same subnet. So you select 10.9.5.4 or whatever you have to select there, or as per your infrastructure IP scheme, and you select one interface there, and one floating IP, probably like this 100/24, right? Okay, now one more gotcha is there is you have to select those interfaces as /32s, right? So if you're configuring on the firewall these two IP addresses, 5.5 and 5.4, those are gonna be /32s, right? And your floating IP, whatever you select right here, it is gonna be with /value as per you would configure on the production environment. So this is /24, right? And these two IP addresses gonna be /values 32, right? Not the whole subnet size, right? Just keep that one in mind. So you will configure the same way. On Azure side, it is a little bit different. It's not exactly like the firewall. On Azure, active firewall will have only two IP, and passive firewall have only two IP, primary and floating IP. What I'm saying floating IP is .100, which is the floating IP between two, right? So .4, .5, and both of them has a secondary IP as a 100, right? So that's going to be on the Azure side, and on the Palo Alto side, you have /32, two of them /24 on the both firewalls. Have an exact same configuration on the Palo side, different on the Azure side, right? So just keep that in mind. If you would want to create the configuration for the static IP address on each of the interfaces. Okay, so this is how you will select the Ethernet 1/3. As I mentioned earlier, you will just go ahead, select the interface 1/3, and interface type as HA, which you can use later on in high availability configuration as HA2 cable. It's going to be 1/3 HA3 connection, right? So that will be responsible for session synchronization. Okay, so a lot of people get confused on this step as well, how to do step 3, right? So this is step 3 is also really important when you consider the HA deployment. If you do not do this, they might not work as a failover to each other. So what this does is it's kind of in a server environment or Active Directory environment. If you want to give some instance or some computer access to some other instance or some other computer to run a script remotely or having different kind of connections, to give that a kind of access, this is what it does, right? So what it does is you configure all these settings, and it can firewall HA1 can have access to firewall HA2. So instance firewall virtual machine 1 can trigger some kind of actions to HA firewall 2 and vice versa. So it gives a remote connection capabilities to each other of these two to the firewalls, right? For step 3 details, what you will have to do is go to this location device VM series, and you have to put all this information on one of the firewall and sync it to the other one. So let's see the details, what are these options and how you can get those information. A lot of people has a question on that one as well. I'll search for how to get this information. So let's see. So this is the first information is the resource group. We're gonna take from bottom to up. That's how it is easy, right? So resource group, you already know how you deploy 2 firewalls in those resource group, and you're gonna put the name of it. Subscription ID, again, very easy. You're gonna go in billing and details on your Azure account and see your subscription ID in there. You can quickly Google search how you can get your subscription ID. A tenant ID, okay, tenant ID, client secret, and client ID. This is going to be related to your Azure account as well as your Active Directory authorization. Okay, so how you can get those details is right here, all the way on the top, right? Okay, tenant ID. This is where you can get your tenant ID from Azure Active Directory property and directory ID. So that's where you get those two, tenant ID. So complicated one is client ID. How you can get that is you will have to create a service principal and specify the permission in VM series Azure principal permission. So if you click on this one, it's going to open the Azure link, how you could assign a new role or register a completely new application with those two instances and create client ID and client secret in here. So you will have to create literally new application, register that application based on resource, exactly follow the same step, register, and then you will be able to get these client ID and client secret from following these steps, right? Okay, so on that one, this is how you get client ID and secret key on those things. If you want to go more in details how that's going to look like, or what information you need or what kind of roles you require for that, you're going to click on this link and you will allow this Azure high availability, right? Or just go to quickly built-in roles, and I usually assign maximum role it requires to access all the both the firewalls gonna give a same access to the whole resource group. So that's how I do every time, and it's pretty easy to do, right? You can quickly Google search for Azure part, that how you would apply that role on the resource group for both the virtual machines. So let's go back to this one part. Hopefully you get these all the parts in here. And then next part is to configure HA. It's going to be very simple, as you would do on your on-site firewalls. Enable HA, configure the group ID, mode is going to be active passive, right? And you put the peer HA IP address. This is going to be management IP address of the second firewall, right? This is what it's going to be, right? And over here you're going to select the management and keep the default configuration whatever it has, right? Make sure you do these active passive settings, hold down time for 1 minute or auto, and then this is for HA tooling. You can configure over here, you're going to configure the current IP address, and default gateway IP address is going to be HA interface IP of the second firewall. Over here, default gateway. This is how usually I do it. That works pretty well. This is going to be one IP address for this firewall interface on HA, right? And this is going to be the default gateway is going to be the IP of the HA on the second firewall, and you're going to do vice versa over here, right? And as you know, HA firewall does not get sync to each other, so you will have to configure on the both of the side differently, right? Peer IP on the second firewall, which gonna be the management of the first firewall, vice versa. Change the device priority to 120 on the passive firewall, 120 or 150, whatever you want. More than, it just need to be more than 100 on the passive firewall, right? If you're selecting 100 on this active firewall. So this is these are the simple part. You're gonna commit the changes, and this is now this is saying step 6. It's saying just how you will configure passive firewalls in Azure. I don't understand why they would explain the HA and everything before you even deploy the second firewall, right? But try to do as I said. It's gonna work very fine. I deploy a lot of firewalls, and that works pretty much nice. Okay, in Azure environment, just keep in mind that passive shows red, not yellow, as per the on-site infrastructure, which is normal, and everything's gonna be up and running, right? And then you can move forward with your whole project deploying the firewall, and this is explaining the whole same thing, how you will configure on the passive firewall, which we already discussed, right? So this is how it's going to be configured on the same way we configure on the active. You're going to configure the same thing on the passive, and that's all. So yeah, couple of just to review conclusion, if you haven't seen the whole video, couple of gotchas is, I'm just gonna repeat the whole conclusion of this video. Couple of gotchas is, you need to have both the firewalls in same Azure resource group, right? You can implement only one firewall from Azure Marketplace, which will allow you to create a new resource group and use the existing resource group. You will have to create a second firewall from this link provided here, right? So that's the first one. Second one is about the licensing. Whatever you select the licenses, make sure you might not be able to change the licenses later on after deploying the whole thing. You might have to redeploy whole environment and then change the licenses and import the config if you had done all the config. That's the second thing. Third thing, when you deploy these firewalls, you will not have this HA interface. You will have only 3 interfaces. So after that, you will have to go add manually NIC interfaces and go to Google, search the whole thing, how you would add new interfaces in the firewall, and that is pretty simple, right? So it you will have to just run this command over here after shutting down those firewalls. You can do, right? Okay. One major gotchas I got in the I got in my last project is, if you select while deploying these firewall as PanOS as the latest, and these marketplace deploy PanOS 10.0, and of course a lot of production guys does not want to get the 10.0 PanOS on production because it's much more new, right? So if you deploy from the Azure marketplace and select latest PanOS, right, and then you have to downgrade the firewall, keep in mind that you will lose access if you don't select the running config before you reboot the firewall. So I'm just going to quickly show you what happens. More details is I would say lost access of Azure firewall. Let's say Azure Palo Alto firewall after downgrade. Okay, so this is the one here. What it does here is basically, if you select this is the issue, when you downgrade firewall from 910 to 90 or 10.0 to 910, if you jump any major version or major release, if you skip select auto save config, which is default selection, it is gonna remove admin credentials, right? It is going to remove admin credential, and you won't be having access to that firewall anymore, and resolution is redeploy the firewall. So there is no resolution. You have to scrap the firewall out. You cannot get any config out of that box, and you will have to redeploy the whole infrastructure, redeploy the whole firewall, and then again downgrade the firewall with using downside arrow running config. So just keep that in mind, right? So that's another one. And where you deploy this firewall, you cannot have these DNS names in uppercase letters, only lowercase letters. You cannot have username as an admin, and make sure this username is case sensitive. Whatever the case you select, if you do not add exactly as the username cases you selected here, you will not be able to log into the firewalls, right? So that those are really important parts. And again, if you deploy the firewall, it is rebooting or something, if you keep trying to log in, it's saying password is incorrect, and you are sure that password is correct, then wait for a few minutes, right? That happens on on-site firewall as well as these virtual firewalls. As long as management server is not ready to log you in, it's gonna say incorrect credential, incorrect password. But don't freak out, just wait for a few more minutes and then try to log in. It's gonna work, right? If you are sure again your password is correct. So yep, those are all, and let me know in comments below if you guys have any questions on deployment, or if you want me to create the whole video of the tutorial how you would create the whole deployment step by step. Right, take care, bye bye.